There is a list that tracks journalists who are killed for their work all over the world. The list by the Committee to Protect Journalists is a key historical record. For example, it tells us the past 2 years have been the deadliest on record for reporters. It also tells us why. More journalists have been killed in Gaza than in both world wars, the Vietnam War, the wars in Yugoslavia, and the US war in Afghanistan combined. And it tells us which nation has murdered more journalists than any other. Israel, which has not let international journalists into Gaza. The CPJ has come under intense fire for documenting these crimes and political pressure to revoke Palestinian names in particular. Then last week, the CPJ said it was reviewing its documentation of journalists killed during the Israel-Gaza War. 20 Palestinians were revoked after militant groups published obituaries identifying them as members. One board member spoke out publicly. She said the review process went beyond individuals and sought to change the group's very definition of journalist in a way that would broadly exclude Palestinians and Lebanese who had been killed. Under international law, journalists affiliated with militant and state groups are protected as civilians as long as they are not directly participating in hostilities. Dr. Nika Soon-Shiong wrote to the committee and called for a vote on the controversial changes. The next day, she was told her term on the board had expired. After days of backlash, the CPJ board has now voted against the changes and reaffirmed its original definition. It rejected claims it had sought to exclude particular groups. I'm joined by Dr. Nika Soon-Shiong, the board member who was removed after complaining, to explain the dispute and what lies behind it. Welcome to MEE Live. Nika, why were these exclusions so concerning to you that you felt compelled to raise the issue publicly?
Well, the Board of Committee to Protect Journalists set up a task force to reevaluate the protection of journalists who are affiliated with non-military wings of identified terrorist organizations. And as we know, terrorism is a term that gives the appearance of objectivity, but is in fact used politically. The reason why Nelson Mandela was on the US terror watch list until 2008. And so I think at a time when this accusation is used to delegitimize Gazan, in particular, Gazan journalists who are telling the world about Israel's crimes, we have to really consider this timing, the composition of the task force, and who really approves it going forward.
Now, if I'm correct, there's sort of two issues in play here. One of them is the decision by the CPJ to review its list of casualties in the Israel war in Gaza, and they removed some Palestinian names after they'd been identified by militant groups as being part of those groups. And then the other issue was about this decision to potentially redefine the term journalist altogether in a way that might discriminatorily or disproportionately exclude Palestinian and Lebanese journalists. Am I understanding the situation correctly? Those were the two sort of concerns raised. And could you just update us about the status of each of those issues today?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to distinguish the two and to say that the process of developing the dashboard is really the heroic work of the Committee to Protect Journalists staff, which is quite different from the effort that I wrote about, that I posted about, and really that is primarily my concern. So there's a lot of criticism of the database and of the people who were removed. Committee to Protect Journalists recently stated that 7 were removed between 2023 and 2024, of which 2 were alive. And there's reasons for each of the removals. Now, I'm not in a position to criticize the removals of particular names, given that the way that this methodology works is that journalists affiliated with armed non-state actors, even those who are classified as a terrorist group by certain countries, are considered civilians, not combatants, and therefore are included in the database. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a definition that is based on international law, and which I think is really important to protect. The effort that really I opposed and that I called for a vote for was around changing that definition to begin with, which would categorically exclude a large number of Palestinian journalists for their affiliation and also for vaguely defined terms such as their behaviors or their activities that are seen to be inciting violence. And now this is actually something, in my mind, that's much more fundamental and much more political. And I think that I would really caution against the broad accusation of the organization and of the staff within the organization for having an ideological position or an intent to remove journalists. In fact, I think this is a methodological question which can be raised, in which the Committee to Protect Journalists is very open to addressing.
You've been a board member of the Committee to Protect Journalists for a long time, so presumably you hold the organisation in high regard. They have flagged that there's a lot of misinformation circling in the wake of this story. Help us to understand the difficulties that they face on this issue.
I think the Committee to Protect Journalists is rightfully protecting both the database and its definition as it currently stands, which is based in international law. I think that's the correct move for the organization to make. I also think that there are bad faith attacks against the organization, particularly geared to lobby the organization to remove even further numbers of Palestinian journalists who are accused of being affiliated with so-called terrorist groups. And so, in many ways, it's necessary to affirm the board's recent decision to continue with the definition as it stands, and to further protect the organization from only receiving criticism from such groups. And we know where these accusations are coming from, and we know the intent because it's stated very clearly.
Now, information warfare has broken out over this story, as you've just indicated as well. One very active account has been Honest Reporting. This is a group that we've talked about here on MEE Live before. Here's what they said.
Nika Soon-Shiong, LA Times Nepo baby and publisher of Dropsite News, just got booted from the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Here's why that's a huge deal. The CPJ is the organization that puts out the most cited list of journalists killed in the Israel-Hamas war. The New York Times, the AP, the Washington Post have all used it for close to 3 years like it was fact. But we at Honest Reporting spent that time showing how the list included actual Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. We audited all 212 names on there. 102 of them, about half, were members or affiliates of a terror group, guys with literal martyr notices from Hamas and PIJ calling them their own fighters. The CPJ quietly started removing names off that list, about 20 so far, and then actually confirmed that 8 were combatants, aka terrorists. But they didn't really want to make it a whole thing. So enter Nika Soon-Shiong. She'd been on CPJ's board since 2021, while also running Dropsite News, an outlet we've repeatedly shown is basically PR for her.
Okay, now this account, which presents itself as an independent media watchdog, but exclusively posts in defense of Israeli state actions, it claims, Nika, that your board exclusion proves the CPJ called Gazan terrorists journalists. Their version of events is that the CPJ was attempting to quietly remove terrorists from the list without a formal process, in part due to Honest Reporting's own exposés. Is this an accurate representation of the process? And was this the kind of reaction that you were worried about when you raised your concerns?
Of course, and I'll say that under international law, journalists affiliated with armed actors, including those who are defined as terrorist groups by certain countries, are considered civilians, and they are journalists. And so, I think that this is a politicized term, and a term of which we have to be very wary. And we've watched the state of Israel commit unspeakable, unlawful violence against civilians. That is the very definition of terrorism. And we must ask, why is Honest Reporting headquartered in Tel Aviv? So we can call an organization Honest Reporting, Free Press, Truth Social, but I think people know the difference. People of conscience know the difference.
Now, this account, at the end of the reel there, it accuses the news outlet you work for, Dropsite News, of being terrorist PR. Does this not essentially reinforce the concerns that you raise about allowing political accusations to strip journalists of humanitarian protection?
Absolutely. I think these kinds of bad faith accusations are being used to silence journalists all over the world. We can look at what's happening in the UK as well. And so standing up against them and really delegitimizing the basis of those accusations is important. And thankfully, Dropsite is a completely independent newsroom, and we publish original investigative reports that are fact-checked, that are verified. And so I'd say the work stands for itself.
Now, Nika, you posted publicly that you were excluded from the board after calling for a vote on this decision. In a recent development, it seems the CPJ has decided to hold a vote and the vote has overturned this redefinition. Will you be resuming your position on the board given this outcome?
I believe that's up to the board and to the board chair, but I have not received communication from CPJ.
And as we conclude, can I ask whether this story is now resolved, or do you still remain concerned about the protection of journalists in contexts like Palestine and Lebanon?
I think this situation is not one that is soon to be resolved. Of course, I remain incredibly concerned and worried, but I think that we must take wins like this and understand the power of people around the world who understand Palestinian Gazan journalists' role in history and who honor it and who understand journalists as the protectors of truth, particularly at a time when the truth is being weaponized and we're being told to disobey the evidence of our eyes and ears. So I'm really grateful for the board's decision, and I'm grateful for the time to speak with you.
Nika Soon-Shiong, thank you for joining me.